By the time I understood what was wrong, I had already started editing myself. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the way people imagine when they hear the word surveillance and picture floodlights or hidden cameras or a detective van parked outside a house. Nothing that theatrical. It was quieter than that. Smaller. Domestic enough to almost sound silly when spoken out loud. I had begun pausing before I spoke in my own kitchen. I noticed it one Tuesday night while I was rinsing rice in the sink. I was about to tell Adrian something petty and affectionate about the woman in our building who always watered the hallway plants as if she had been personally appointed Minister of Leaves. It was the sort of stupid observation couples make all the time, disposable and harmless and alive for only a few seconds before dinner. But halfway through the thought, I looked up and saw the black frames on his face. I stopped. He asked what I was going to say. I told him it didn't matter. That was the first moment I caught myself making my inner life smaller to fit around an object he had promised would not matter. The glasses had arrived 4 days earlier in a slim white box that looked, offensively, like something elegant. Adrian liked new technology in the way some men like expensive knives or precision bikes or speakers engineered in countries they pronounce with reverence. He enjoyed research. He enjoyed upgrades. He enjoyed the feeling that the future had trusted him early. Usually I found that quality harmless, sometimes even useful. He was the reason I bought a better tablet 2 years ago and the reason our router stopped dropping out during rainstorms. He read product manuals for fun. He watched long reviews with subtitles on. He could compare battery life the way other people compared wine. I was not, by temperament, his opposite. I used all the same normal things most people use. Phone, laptop, maps, streaming services, online banking, grocery delivery when the week got ugly. But I was careful in a way he teased me for. I turned off permissions that did not need to be on. I read privacy settings. I disliked the casual way people now surrendered their faces, their rooms, their habits, their grief, their children, their meals, their arguments, their jokes, and then acted astonished when the world felt more extractive than it used to. Adrian knew all of this. Not vaguely. Not as a personality quirk. He knew because we had already had the conversations. More than once. Long ones. The kind that begin with a product and end with a worldview. So when he came home from his eye appointment and said, almost too brightly, "I ordered the new frames, and I also bought the thing you're probably going to hate," I knew before he opened the box that this was not going to stay casual. He lifted the glasses from their case with that same boyish satisfaction people get when they can already imagine themselves being envied. He said they would be amazing for travel, for concerts, for walking tours, for capturing moments without holding up a phone like everybody else. He said they could answer questions, translate signs, take calls, and shoot video hands-free. Then he said the line I would think about for weeks. "It's not like I'm going to wear them around the house." He said it unprompted, before I had even asked, which meant some part of him already knew exactly where my concern would land. I remember standing there with one shoe still on, listening to the refrigerator hum, and feeling the familiar split between love and recognition. Love makes you want to believe a promise because it would be easier to live in the version of events where the person offering it understands you. Recognition is less flattering. Recognition notices the shape of the promise itself. He had not said, "I understand why this might feel invasive." He had not said, "Let's figure out a boundary that protects your comfort." He had said, preemptively, that he would not do the one thing he suspected would upset me. And maybe if he had simply kept that promise, this would have become one of those tiny domestic stories that disappears behind bigger life events. But promises made in the tone of reassurance can become bait if the speaker only means them until the novelty fully boots up. The first evening, the glasses were still a toy. He linked them to his phone, updated the software, tested the voice features, laughed at the tiny speaker sound, and took a video of our living room while narrating it like a travel host. I tolerated it because the energy felt temporary. Annoying, yes, but temporary in the way a person is temporary when they first buy a drone or a milk frother or a standing desk and spend 48 hours converting the whole house into a demonstration. Then Saturday morning came. I was in the kitchen making coffee when he walked in already wearing them. Not on a trip. Not outside. Not as a 1-second joke. Actually wearing them. I looked at him and said, lightly at first, "Why do you have those on in here?" He looked honestly surprised by my tone, like I had interrupted a perfectly normal morning ritual. He said he wanted to get used to the prescription. He said they were still just glasses. He said he was not recording. That phrase would become his shield. I'm not recording. People say trust me most often when they are refusing the small behavior that would make trust unnecessary. I let it go that morning because I did what I usually do when I want to avoid becoming the first person to make a pleasant day difficult. I told myself adjustment time made sense. I told myself maybe I was attaching too much meaning to an object. I told myself relationships contain 1,000 tiny accommodations, and perhaps this was one more. But the problem with private discomfort is that it starts collecting evidence when you ask it to be quiet. By Sunday night, he had worn them while unloading groceries, while making eggs, while lying on the sofa scrolling through football highlights, while asking me whether we still had laundry detergent, and while standing in the bathroom mirror brushing his teeth. I know that last image sounds absurdly specific, but that is how violations settle into memory. Not as a thesis. As scenes. A black lens over the sink. A reflection where a face should have felt ordinary. An object that did not belong in an intimate routine, and yet had been invited there by the person who was supposed to care most how the room felt to me. I tried to talk about it Sunday after dinner. Not accusingly. Carefully. The carefulness of women who would prefer not to be called controlling for asking that one thing stay simple. I said I was more unsettled than I expected to be. I said our apartment was the only place where I did not want to think about devices, interpreting, storing, translating, suggesting, listening, or potentially documenting anything. I said I understood he found them interesting, but I needed home to feel like home, not like a beta test. He sighed in a way that made my skin go cold. Not angry, worse, patient. As if he were about to explain to me that my feelings had developed out of proportion to reality. He said the glasses were no different from the phone in his pocket. He said our phones already had microphones and cameras. He said if he really wanted to record me, he could do it with things we already owned. He said the technology itself was not the issue. My anxiety was. That is one of the oldest tricks in intimate conflict. Turn the object into a thought experiment, so the practical boundary sounds irrational. If all devices are equally invasive, then objecting to one specific behavior becomes hypocrisy. If privacy is already compromised everywhere, then asking for one protected zone sounds naive. If the threat exists in theory no matter what, then the person creating an unnecessary new discomfort gets to act inconvenienced by your failure to become modern enough. I told him there was a difference and we both knew it. A phone in a pocket is not the same social object as a camera sitting on someone's face during breakfast. Potential matters. Context matters. Ease matters. The human body matters. A thing you can activate without changing posture changes the emotional weather of a room. He laughed a little and said, "You make it sound like I'm a cop interrogating you over cereal." I wish anger had come first. Instead, what came was loneliness. Because mockery, even gentle mockery, has a way of announcing that the conversation is no longer about solving the discomfort. It is about whether your discomfort deserves the dignity of being taken literally. I said it wasn't funny to me. He said he knew that, but it still felt extreme. Then he said the sentence that finished rearranging the house in my mind. "Can't you just trust that I wouldn't film anything private?" Anything private. As if privacy were a narrow category of dramatic moments. As if it only began when clothing came off or voices rose. As if ordinary life were not also private. As if me reading a bill at the table, rubbing moisturizer into my face, pacing in a towel while I decide whether to call my mother back, muttering about money, opening a medicine cabinet, crying quietly over something I do not yet have words for. As if none of that counted because it did not fit the cinematic version of vulnerability. That night, I became aware of my own apartment in a new way. I changed for bed in the bathroom with the door shut, even though we had spent 3 years together and had never needed that layer of formality. I turned a lamp off before taking off my bra, not because I believed he was filming me, but because I hated that my body had started solving a problem he refused to admit existed. He asked if I was upset. I said yes. He said I was punishing him over glasses. Over glasses. That was how he wanted the conflict named. Not over consent, not over comfort, not over a boundary he had anticipated and then tested. Over glasses. On Monday, he left them on the kitchen counter while he showered. I stared at them while I packed my lunch. It surprised me, the hostility I felt toward an object. They were sleek, expensive, almost aggressively tasteful. No blinking red light, no cartoonish design. They had been engineered precisely to disappear into normalcy, which was maybe what bothered me most. A machine that can pass as manners is harder to argue with than one that announces itself. When he came out, I asked whether he would be willing to make a simple rule. No smart glasses inside the apartment. Outside, fine. Trips, fine. Concerts, fine. Walking around a new city, fine. But not at home. He leaned against the counter and looked at me the way people do when they think compromise means accepting their preferred arrangement with a slight cosmetic change. He said no recording at home should be enough. He said taking the glasses off every time he came inside was performative. He said I was focusing on symbolism. Yes, I wanted to say. Exactly, that was the whole point. A home is built out of symbolism. Shoes off at the door. Voices lowered after midnight. Knocking before entering a closed room. Not reading a letter left face down on a table. Not wearing a device with a camera across from your fiancé while she eats toast and wonders whether she is allowed to dislike the future. But once a person starts calling your boundary symbolic, they are already halfway to declaring it unnecessary. I asked him a question the comments on the original thread would later converge on, so cleanly it almost sounded scripted by collective instinct. If you do not need them in the house, why is taking them off such a problem? He did not answer directly. He said I was turning a convenience into a moral issue. He said he liked having one pair of glasses on all day. He said I was asking him to manage my discomfort instead of managing it myself. That line landed harder than he probably intended, because hidden inside it was the admission that he had already decided whose internal world would have to stretch. Mine, not his. It is such a quiet heartbreak, realizing a person you love has begun sorting the inconveniences in your shared life by who can be relied upon to swallow more. By Tuesday, I was tracking the frames the way people track a stain spreading along a ceiling. Not obsessively. Helplessly. There they were when he came home from work. There they were while he chopped onions. There they were during a conversation about whether we should go see his mother that weekend. There they were when he leaned over to kiss my forehead. I kept noticing the same thing. He had stopped treating them as a new purchase and started treating them as default, which meant if I wanted relief, I would have to keep asking for it. Again and again. I would have to become the recurring obstacle in a story where he got to be the easygoing one, unless I interrupted the flow. That dynamic matters more than outsiders usually understand. A boundary is not just the words you say once. It is also the maintenance burden of being the only person who has to remember it. On Wednesday, my sister called while I was alone in the apartment. I told her the whole thing, because I needed to hear my own concerns in another person's silence. Sometimes you know what you think only after you hear how carefully you are packaging it for someone else. I expected her to tell me I was making a mountain out of stylish nonsense. Instead, she said, immediately, if he knows it unsettles you and he still wants them on in the house, then the glasses aren't the point anymore. I sat down at the edge of the bed. Because that was it. That was the sentence I had been circling. The glasses were no longer the point. The point was that he had discovered a very cheap way to test whether my comfort could be recategorized as overreaction. That night I tried once more. I said I did not want us to become one of those couples who spend 6 months pretending they are arguing about logistics when they are actually deciding whose dignity sets the temperature of the relationship. I said I was not accusing him of secretly filming me. I was telling him that the possibility itself changed how free I felt in the apartment. I said intimacy depends on unself-consciousness, and I could already feel mine thinning out. He got quiet for a while, and for one hopeful minute, I thought he had understood. Then he said, I feel like you're asking me to prove a negative. That is a smart sentence. A tidy sentence. The kind a person says when they would rather win the framing than lose the behavior. I told him I was not asking him to prove he would never misuse the glasses. I was asking him to stop bringing them into the one environment where misuse would not need to happen for damage to occur. He said damage was too strong a word. I asked him what word he preferred for the process of becoming less at ease in your own home. He had none. We slept badly that night. Not because we fought loudly. Because we did not. There is a special exhaustion in lying beside someone you love while feeling your nervous system stay one notch too awake. He reached for my hand once and I let him take it, which somehow made me sadder. Love does not vanish just because clarity arrives. Sometimes it remains fully intact and simply loses the power to make a bad arrangement feel safe. The next morning gave me my answer, not through an argument, through habit. I had gotten up early for a presentation and was standing in the bathroom in my slip, hair clipped up, rehearsing the first 2 lines under my breath while dabbing concealer under one eye. The door was open a few inches because the apartment was warm and the mirror always fogged too quickly. Adrian crossed the hallway carrying a mug. He still had the glasses on. He did not come in. He did not film me. He did not do anything dramatic at all. He simply glanced toward the bathroom, smiled, and kept walking to the kitchen. But something in me closed. Not because of an act, because of the total normality on his face. He had become so comfortable wearing them in intimate space that he no longer even saw the moment as charged. And if he no longer saw it, I was going to spend the rest of our life detecting and translating a discomfort he would keep insisting was theoretical. I finished my makeup with the bathroom door shut. On the train, I realized I was not thinking about the presentation anymore. I was thinking about scale. About how many women get told they are too sensitive when what they really are is early. Early to the implication. Early to the pattern. Early to the point where inconvenience becomes philosophy and philosophy becomes the architecture of a life. When I came home that evening, he was cooking pasta. No glasses. For a second, my whole body softened. Then I saw them on the counter beside the olive oil. Charging. Ready. Waiting. The absence was temporary, not principled. And that distinction felt almost cruel. I turned off the stove. He looked startled. I said I needed him to hear me without translating me into fearfulness, technophobia, symbolism, or anxiety. I said I could not build a marriage in a home where I had to negotiate for the right to feel unwatched. I said I needed a real answer, not another argument about whether phones also have cameras. Then I asked him the plainest question I knew. Are you willing to keep those out of the apartment because I am asking you to? He did not say yes. He did not say no immediately either, which was somehow worse. He rubbed the back of his neck and started explaining what a hassle it was to switch glasses, how expensive they were, how much he liked the prescription, how he felt controlled by blanket rules, how he worried giving in would mean agreeing that the product itself was wrong. That is when I understood we were finally speaking about different gods. I was speaking about care. He was speaking about precedent. He wanted to protect the principle that he should not have to limit himself for a fear he considered hypothetical. I wanted to protect the fact that love sometimes looks exactly like limiting yourself in one small way, because the person beside you has made a clear and reasonable request. When he finished, I felt strangely calm. I said, "Then I think I should go stay with my sister for a few days." He looked stunned, as if I had skipped steps, as if all of this had still lived in his mind inside the category of ordinary couple disagreement. He said leaving over this was insane. He said I was escalating. He said nobody would understand. That last line almost made me smile, because it told me he had begun imagining an audience before I had even packed a bag. And maybe he was right about one thing. Many people would not understand at first glance. That is the nature of invisible boundaries. From far away, they always look more negotiable than they feel from the inside. I went into the bedroom, took out a weekender bag, and folded clothes with a weird efficiency that comes only after a long period of confusion breaks into decision. He followed me twice, then stopped. He asked if I was really choosing this hill to die on. I said no. I was choosing the house I wanted to live in. At my sister's place, I slept for 10 hours. That told me more than the argument had. Bodies are rude that way. They reveal what minds spend days trying to phrase politely. Over the next 2 days, he texted long messages that circled the issue without ever landing on it. He said he loved me. He said he would never violate my trust. He said he felt judged for being excited about innovation. He said the world was full of cameras anyway. He said he hated that I had turned him into some creepy caricature in my head. I read every message carefully. What I did not find was the one sentence I needed. I will keep them out of the apartment. That absence became its own proof object, not the glasses themselves anymore. The missing sentence. The tiny, practical concession he could have made on day one, and still would not make after days of fallout. When we finally met for coffee, he wore ordinary glasses, a peace offering, perhaps, or a performance of reasonableness. He looked tired. So did I. He said he had talked to friends, and some thought I was overreacting, but some thought he should have just taken them off at home. He said he still felt I was making the issue bigger than it needed to be, but he missed me and wanted to move forward. I asked, move forward how? He said we could agree he would never record inside and would tell me if he ever wanted to test a feature. I said that was not my boundary. He said he knew, but he needed something that felt fair to both of us. Fair. Such a useful word when you want compromise to mean the more flexible person continues absorbing the cost. I stirred my coffee and looked at him long enough that he dropped his eyes. Then I said the truest thing I had learned. It shouldn't take a negotiation to convince the person you love to create one unwatched room in your life. He went quiet. For the first time, truly quiet. No theories. No analogies. No product logic. Just the sound of a sentence landing where all my careful explanations had failed. I wish I could tell you that was the moment everything changed. It wasn't. Some relationships do not end because of one outrageous act. They end because a small object reveals a large hierarchy. Who gets believed about comfort? Who gets asked to adapt? Who gets called dramatic for noticing what the other person calls normal? We postponed the wedding 3 weeks later. Officially, we said we needed more time. That was true, but incomplete. What I really needed was to stop trying to marry someone who experienced my private ease as an argument he should be able to outthink. People who hear the story now still divide almost immediately. Some say it was just a pair of glasses. Others ask the right question. If it was just a pair of glasses, why was taking them off at home too much to ask? That is the whole story. Not whether the camera was active. Not whether any footage existed. Not whether he was secretly monstrous. The story is that I told the man I loved what made me feel less free in my own home, and he became more committed to defending the object than to removing the feeling. Privacy is often misunderstood as secrecy. It is not. Privacy is the soft, ordinary condition that lets a person exist before they become content, data, evidence, or memory for someone else's machine. It is brushing your teeth without feeling observed. It is leaving a thought unfinished because you got distracted, not because you scanned the room first. It is having a face that belongs only to the moment you are in. I did not leave because I believed Adrian was plotting to archive my life. I left because he kept asking me to call it love, when what he wanted was access without friction. And once you hear that difference clearly, even a silent room can sound crowded.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.